Morning, HPC. Welcome to day 3 of our looking at the Dawn of Redeeming Grace by Sinclair Ferguson. Sinclair Ferguson, I think I should have said. Day 3, looking at Matthew chapter 1, verses 1 to 17. Have you read it? Have you read it again? It's quite striking, isn't it, that he manages to get such richness from these 17 verses which, if I'm honest, I would be all too keen on glossing over. What have we got for today? If you haven't read it, do go and do that. Do go and read those list of names again. But what about today? Well, I think one of the things that strikes me from both what Ferguson says and from the gospel passage is how the names of the great and the good and the famous that show us how Jesus is descended down through history from Abraham are interspersed with the failures and the sin-torn, if you like. A reminder that Jesus is happy to be associated with ordinary people, with ordinary problems, people who are affected by sin. He gives us those brilliant 3 points, doesn't he, on page 25. Why does Matthew sort of mention the people that he does in Jesus's family line? And he says this: I suspect he is giving us hints of 3 important biblical principles. Number 1, God's grace extends beyond the chosen people and brings the Gentiles into his covenant, into his promise of blessing and life and forgiveness. Second, God overcomes the effects of sin and shame as he works out his purposes. And third, God keeps his promises in ways that we could never have anticipated. And I think that's brilliant, isn't it? That's one of the things we remember at Christmas, the keeping of God's promise in a way that we would never have imagined. 5 women, cherchez la femme, is what he says. 5 women appear in the genealogy: Tamar, Ruth, Rahab, Bathsheba, or the wife of Uriah, as she's known, and Mary. All of whom faced great social difficulty, but all of whom God treated mercifully and whom God used to carry forward his plans of blessing to the world. Tamar, Rahab and Bathsheba, all involved in sexual sin, a point that Matthew almost underlines when he calls Bathsheba the wife of Uriah. It's sort of like it'd be almost like taking a highlighter and saying this was an issue. And that phrase recalls David's abuse of her, his exploitation of her, and the adultery that was part of it. Ruth is incredibly poor. She's a foreigner. She goes out to try and use the equivalent of the Bethlehem food bank, gleaning in the fields. And Mary, although innocent of any kind of sexual wrongdoing, was thought to have been unfaithful to her fiancé. So just have a look at verse 19 of Matthew chapter 1, the idea that Joseph is going to put her away quietly. Despite their lives made difficulty by poverty and sin, whether their own or other people's sin, God helped these women and gave them important places in his plan to save his people from their sins. And this reminds that God is able to save everyone, and that he doesn't have a special group of holy people. No, he uses ordinary people who've been sinned against and people who are sinners, and that's hugely encouraging, I think. It's amazing how much he crams into these verses, and it's striking what a clever writer Matthew is. That he organises his material in such a way that even in something that might look rather boring, there's real depth. I would never have decided to begin my historical account like this, but Matthew wants us to know this is history. Jesus was a real person. These were real people. Real people who lived in a messed up world, who lived difficult lives, and, brilliantly, people who Jesus was happy to have known to be part of his family. And he's happy to have you and me as part of his family as well. Isn't that brilliant? Have a really good day, HPC.